Hey guys, thanks again for joining us. Today I've got Betsie Poinsett. She was on the first video that we did. She is a hypnotherapist and a shaman. And we have Amari Magdalena with us today as well, who is a shaman herself and has a whole list of other things that she has accomplished that I will go into later. But first, Betsie, how you been?
Fine. Thank you for having me back. I
Good,
appreciate it.
good.
Yes.
Amari, how about you? How you been?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, good deal, good deal. Thank both of you guys for joining me, and we'll just get right into it and let Betsie start with some insight that she's wanting to bring to us today. What would you
Okay.
like
Well,
to What would you like to delve into today, Betsie?
well, we talked last time about how the mind, the conscious mind, is only 12% of our mind power, and the subconscious is 88%, which is our where all of our patterns are. And I talked about doing 3 sessions for people usually to start them off on a good foundation for change. And many times, that first session, I have to really deal with a person's wounded inner child. Let's face it, many people didn't have great childhoods, and that's the sad part. There's this little bit of them back there in their subconscious mind going, help, help, nobody ever saved me, nobody ever helped me. And this, as an adult, this is really what causes sabotage in our life. We can be moving forward, trying to get promotions, trying to have a good marriage. And that little child's going, oh, wait for me. I'm still back here feeling hurt. So I really go back and help them integrate with that inner child. It's like putting all your puzzle pieces back together again so that we can move forward with positive change and not sabotage yourself. So that's really an important piece of what I do.
Awesome.
Yeah. And along with that, I do help a lot of kids too. And I help kids pass tests. I help them be better in sports. I do a lot of what we call, not woo-woo things. I help people pass exams. I've helped a lot of people stop having fear of needles and also fear of flying. Yes. So it's exciting because I like it. I never know what I'm going to be dealing with.
Oh yeah. Now, last time we talked, you had talked about a guy who you had actually helped with fear of heights, and you had done some regression therapy with him to help him out, and that was a lot of people really dug that story. But when we were talking the other day, you mentioned something about kind of along the same lines, but instead of taking him to the past, you had brought his consciousness, his subconscious, into a future state. You want to go into some of that with us?
Yes, of course. Now, it wasn't particularly him that I did the future with, but okay. I've done, like, for an example, I had a boy that came in who was really suicidal. His parents had brought him to me twice, actually, and the second time he was really suicidal. And I hate to say it, but it was about a girl who jilted him, and at that tender age, the teenagers, they just take it in. So I asked him, what would he like to do? What would he think he'd like to do as a career? Now, he was still in high school at the time, and he said he really wanted to be an architect because he would draw these intricate buildings. I mean, he was really a fabulous artist. So in hypnosis, instead of working on anything else, I asked him to go out to the future. I said, what's going on in your future? Well, there he was as an architect, making beautiful buildings and everything. And after he finished the session, he left, and turns out he went to Georgia Tech. He was accepted at Georgia Tech, and he is now an architect.
Man, that's great.
So that's what it's about.
Now, let me ask you about that. On what is your take on that? Do you think, or do you feel like you actually are able to, because I know that there's a lot of belief that maybe time isn't so linear, but maybe circular or even fluid. It's like this almost like something that you kind of go through, but it's always there. If that's the case, do you feel like you really go into either this person's future or past, or do you think it's something that's inside the subconscious that as you change that subconscious place of thought inside the mind, that it changes their perception of life and makes them overcomers?
Well,
or maybe both.
Right. I was going to say it's all of that. And I was reminded of a study that was done. I forget, it was Harvard or Yale that did this study. And they took the basketball team. And this is how they were proving how the mind is and how it retains and information. And they took half the team and they said, okay, we want you to really practice hitting the basket. Just keep practicing. And the other half of the team, they said, just close your eyes and we just want you to pretend. We want you to visualize that you're doing this. And they wanted to see what the difference was, if one part would have more success than the other. And they both had the exact same results.
Yeah, I've actually read that same study. I used to teach that study to my teens that I had, and taught it to my kids. Yeah, and that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. The power of the mind, when your mind, because your mind doesn't know any different. It doesn't know if you're sitting here or if it's actually doing the thing that you're projecting in your mind to be doing. And
yes. Very good.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And people don't really realize that you can visualize. And now it takes effort too to make yourself skilled at it. But if you've never thrown a basketball in your life and you're just sitting there visualizing throwing a basket, I don't know, maybe it'll work. But I know that if you visualize and practice it, or if you've already practiced and and then you visualize that more and more, that yes, it definitely increases your percentage on achieving that which you pursue. So,
well, a lot of professional athletes use that technique. Mm-hmm. I happen to like golf, and I was watching the Masters. That's a really famous golf tournament over in Augusta, Georgia, every year. And one of the leading guys, I'm sorry, I forget his name, but I was watching him, hit the ball and stand at the tee, and he was actually closing his eyes first and visualizing making those shots. And it was the first time I really saw it on television. That somebody that wasn't in hypnosis or anything was using that technique.
Oh yeah.
So it's really great.
Did that last night, actually. It was pretty cool. We were playing dominoes, and the boneyard, I don't know where the extra dominoes are. If you don't have anything that you can play, you have to go and pull. And there was a few over there, and I told my friends that I was sitting with, I was like, well, watch this, hang on. And I just closed my eyes and I'm looking, and there's like 8 of them out there, and there's only one tile that has this number on it out of the 8. Uh-huh. And I'm like, I'm just going to meditate a minute and see. And I sat there maybe a minute and a half, and I felt like this one was it. Sure enough, pulled it. And I did that twice throughout the game, man. And they were like, wow, that's kind of neat, which it is neat. It's very neat if you can, and it doesn't work all the time, of course, if you're not focused, or if you second guess yourself a lot of times, because what I've learned is it's always that first glimpse, and that glimpse may only be a half a second, and then the rest of the time you're thinking opposite of what that glimpse was, and it's very important to grab that first little second. So
that's what manifesting is all about, and that's why when people say your words are so important, what you think, that's the whole thing. People need to think, when they say think positive, well, it's because we want to manifest important things to us. That's what the law of attraction is all about. And again, I said last time, it takes 21 days or 21 repetitions to get that really going in your mind. And which reminds me about manifesting. I also do, a lot of healing for people. And speaking of the youth, I did have a story about this boy, and another boy in high school, actually. His mother sent him to me because she wanted him to pass his exams in his senior year, because he was really kind of on the border there. And so we had an appointment. He came to see me, and just before he came to see me, he broke his leg. And his leg was in a cast when he came to see me. So I have steps people have to come up. So he clumps up the steps of this cast, and he sits down, and we talked about his exams and everything. And he said, I've got to wear this cast for 6 weeks. He said, and I've got to wear it when I graduate. You know, I've got to walk down the aisle with this cast on. And I said, all right. And so this is another future projection also. We did 3 things in one session, which is I love. So when people come to me for hypnosis, we talk first, and then they sit on a recliner and they just close their eyes. And that's when I start talking to them and open that filter between the conscious and the subconscious mind to make these new positive patterns. So he was pretty deep. I had to count him down pretty deep. And so I said, look, while you're in hypnosis, let's just heal your leg. I said, just imagine that your leg is healing. All those bones are healing and everything. And it'll be done. Well, okay, I did that. And then we went on to passing the exams. And then I took him out to a future. And the future, I said, okay, what does your future look like? And he really wanted to be in a band. He was a great musician. So he saw himself, you know, as a very successful musician. All right, so he leaves the session and he goes home. His mother happened to be a good friend of mine, and she called me the next day. And she said, I've got to tell you, she said, when Stephen was his name, she said, when he was sitting in the chair and you started talking about healing his leg, he said, Mom, I could feel the bones all knitting back together again. He said, my whole leg was tingling. I said, well, that's great. Well, as I said, the doctor, did I say 6 weeks he had to wear the cast, I think?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that next week he went back to the doctor for a checkup, and they took an x-ray or whatever, and the doctor said, you might as well take that cast off. He said, your leg is all healed.
Oh, man, that's so awesome. That is so awesome.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's, like I said, that's what it's all about.
Oh, yeah.
And he did go.
That's something that a lot of people may never experience, you know, but it is absolutely real. I mean, and I'm not going to say that I understand fully how all that stuff happens, but it does happen. For instance, my daughter was healed. She had what was called Kawasaki's disease. And you may have heard about it here lately because there was a uptick in some cases that people said were reminiscent of Kawasaki's disease, or maybe even Kawasaki's disease that was coming out while all this coronavirus was going on. But it's a rare disease, and it affects your heart and the lining of your arteries. And the last stage of it can cause heart failure. And the last stage of it before it goes into heart failure is the skin on your hands and on your lips will crack and peel. Mm-hmm. Well, my daughter at the time, she was very young, maybe 4. And she was experiencing all these symptoms. We took her to the doctors, and it took months for them to diagnose her with Kawasaki's disease. Mm-hmm. Well, so maybe 6 months into all this, going back and forth through the hospitals, maybe 3. It might have been, you know, it might have been less time than what I'm remembering, but it seemed like forever.
Oh, yeah.
And so anyway, while all this is going on, she'll spike 106 fever every once in a while. She has spots on her body. She's not feeling well ever. And it's just a horrible situation. So the day comes where my wife at the time was out and about with the children, and she gives me a call and says, oh my God, Mike, India's hands are peeling. I think she was going to her mom's house or something like that. She said her hands are peeling. I'm taking her to the hospital now. So she starts to head there. And of course, the doctors had scared us to death. You know, I mean, absolutely scared the shit out of us, because they said when this happens, she would go into heart failure, or had a possibility of going into heart failure. So we're freaking out. We're freaking out, and my spirit, I'm freaking out because, you know, at the time I was a teacher of spiritual things. Some people call it a pastor. I was a minister to at a teen center that we had in Cleveland. But anyway, at that time, you know, I still had faith, but I didn't understand completely. Like, I still don't understand completely, but I understand more now about it than I did back then. But at the time, I just had this scared moment. And I just went into a heartfelt full of feeling. I mean, you could feel, when you feel this has to happen. And I went into prayer in that kind of way. And I kid you not, just as clear as I can hear you talking to me at this moment, I heard a voice, and there's a fly, it's driving me crazy. I heard a voice inside of my head say, stop asking me for what I've already told you I would do. And the thing that got me when it said that was that in the past, I'd already been praying about her healing. And so I'd already asked, obviously, and this voice said, just begin to be thankful for it. So as I began to just go from, oh God, you've got to do something that's happening right now, to, oh, it's already done.
Yeah. Peace
just flew into the situation where I was. And I still wasn't with my daughter, mind you. I was still in between my home and the hospital. So I'm driving, and there's peace just comes over me. I get to the hospital. They had gotten a ambulance ready to take my daughter to Eggleston in Atlanta. And they were going to rush her down there and do some more tests and this and that. Well, when I get there, the guy comes in the room, and he tells us that he doesn't know what to tell us because her blood work's coming back fine. Well, my wife at the time was very upset with that because she's tired of going up and down with all these diagnoses and in and out of the hospitals. So my daughter's asleep in the corner, rolled up in the corner, so her back's towards us. And so she rolls her over and grabs her hand and goes, well, what about this? And when she throws her hand out, and this is the God's honest truth, man, her hands were no longer cracking. Her lips were no longer blistered. Her body had no spots on it. Her temperature was gone. I mean, they checked her out. She was fine. And the doctor called back Eggleston and said, we're having to cancel the room. I don't know what the guy said on the other line, but he said to him, he goes, I don't know. Obviously, somebody else had bigger plans for her, and hung up. And then he proceeds to come back and tell us, he goes, don't ever let anybody tell you you didn't see what you just saw. He said, because I saw it too. And he said, and that was definitely a miracle. And just stuff like that is just amazing, man. My brother was an EMT, and he actually saw a man here in Claremont, Georgia. He was passed away in a field. They went, got a call that a man had a heart attack in a field. They went out there, they hook up all I don't know what the sensors are called. He told me at the time, but he said that they're so sensitive they would respond if a grasshopper jumped on him.
Wow.
Then he said he was dead. He was so dead that his body temperature was lowering. It was no longer in the range that we have to live. He said while they were sitting there doing all their stuff he heard a rumble of people coming over the hill. Mm-hmm. Over the hill came this group of people that was his family, extended family and everything else. And they said they wanted to pray for him. And he said, okay. Well, they laid hands on him. And he said, and my brother was not a religious man. He wasn't, he was a paramedic, an EMT, a fireman. He just loved people, loved to help people. He said while he was standing there, he said that man got up from being dead. Now, he said he got up and wouldn't even let him take him to the hospital. He said, I'm fine. He was like an older gentleman too. And again, it was an amazing story. And I wish he was here with us today to tell it. But
that's beautiful. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
The miracle. I'm sure Amari's seen them too. I mean, it's just, that's what keeps me going, is all those kinds of stories.
Yeah, for sure.
I really love that. And prayer is so important. And the extra step there of being thankful, as if it has already been done.
Yeah.
That's how it really comes about. I've just seen miracles myself. Yeah.
Most certainly. Well, that kind of leads us into what we're going to talk with Amari about, which is shamanism and things and a plethora of things that she has for us today. For you guys that are watching, just want to give you a little rundown of who Amari is. Amari, she is an elder wisdom keeper, a minister, a master healer, and an author of several books on aspects of ancient wisdom for modern solutions. Now that's what kind of got my attention, was the way that she explained herself as being someone who brings about wisdom for a modern solution, ancient wisdom for modern solution. And so I was looking at some other things online about you, and I read an article, and the article was spoken about how you demystify shamanism. And that's a beautiful thing to me, because I feel like when we can take something that seems so far away and bring it more into arm's reach, you know, to a level to where we can understand it a little more, it becomes more attainable to us. So Amari, thank you again for being with us. And if you would just
thank you for having me.
have at it. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So
right.
yeah, so go ahead. What were you going to bring to us today, dear?
Well, you know, as you spoke about that, I thought one of the things that attracted me to shamanism is that we have lost our tribal tether, many people. And we could say it's like when the umbilical cord is cut, when a baby's being born, that feeding, that constant nourishment is severed and it's changed to something else. But we all came from tribes originally. And we see that indigenous people still have that connection. And so they have a continuity and an understanding about how the world works. And we could say that in shamanism, we're looking at the cosmology of the world. And sometimes we're so distracted in modern living with all the externals that we forget that there's a whole cosmology about this universe. And we have in shamanism what we call the medicine wheel, which is the outer cosmology. And then we have the inner cosmology of what belongs in you. That kind of ties to what Betsie was talking about with the inner child. But let me explain that. Let's imagine that we didn't have all these accoutrements. We didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have electricity. We were living, you know, outside in nature, finding shelter in caves or whatever. The guiding things that impacted us were our connection with those great big orbs in the sky, the sun and the moon. They provided light, okay? We had some natural predators, animals that were seeking food, and we looked good to them. And we needed more light to see these people. But we began to appreciate that when the sun was out, we could see what was going on. And when the moon was in a full moon cycle, we had night vision, okay? So I believe that from that developed many of the thoughts about shamanism, and one of them is the connection with what we call all that is. So there are four kingdoms: the animal, the plant, the mineral, and the human. And they had reverence for all of them, something that we've kind of lost along the way. Some people, you know, have gotten back to that, but a lot of people have lost that kind of tether of connection with everything that impacts this globe that we're on, that we call Earth. And so the elements of air and fire and water and earth impacted them. So that became important to them. And they began through their living in this more what we would call primitive conditions to begin to ascribe certain qualities to the things that were in their environment and how they impacted them. So one of the things about the medicine wheel that really helped me personally was seeing that there's an unbroken energy. The wheel is always turning, like you know, we're moving around the sun, etc. I think that was very helpful for me to understand it. And in that turning in our lives, we go through various stages. So many tribes have divided that wheel into 4 quadrants. And the quadrants are the directions of east and west and north and south. So we say that we come into the eastern corridor. That's the beginning. We came through light, we enter in light, and that's the direction of what we call illumination. And then we move into the south, which is our childhood, and we begin to go through some of the emotional experiences of our life. And then we move to the west, which is the direction of illusion. And so we began to go through our adolescence and our early adulthood, when sometimes we have a lot of issues and a lot of emotions and experiences, and the guy that was jilted and all that kind of stuff. And then we move to the north, which is what we call our wisdom corridor. And we say that everyone travels that, and they exit the east. They go back to the east and leave in the light. And those people that had near-death experiences, and I've had one, you go through a tunnel into bright light. It's beautiful. And so you're returning into the light. And then they begin to say, all right, well, there's more to these directions than just how they're located in the circle. We say that the east is part of the season of spring, when things begin. And many cultures, our Gregorian calendar isn't that old. It came about in the 1800s. Before that, people lived by the cycles of the sun and moon, and many cultures still acknowledge spring as the beginning of the year. In the Iranian culture, the Persian culture, Nowruz is a celebration of the spring, and that begins the cycle of the year. And so then they went further and said, well, there must be other symbology that represents aspects of what we're learning in each of those directions. And so we look at the east to the west is illumination to illusion. The north to the south is wisdom to innocence. So back in the east, they would also ascribe an element to the direction. I personally come to realize that the elements that are ascribed to the directions have to do with where we're located, okay? So in my situation right now, I'm in Las Cruces, New Mexico. East are the Organ Mountains, so I call that earth, okay? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. The west faces the Rio Grande River, I call that water. The north faces, up toward Colorado and then the Rockies, etc. So I call that air. A lot of air currents come. And the south faces Mexico, which is hot, getting hotter as we go further south. Now this would be the opposite if we were in another hemisphere. Mm-hmm. So we consider that. Then we look at, well, what do we learn in each corridor? And so in the east, we're looking at clarity, wisdom, and illumination. This is where we have our insights. It's where we begin to connect with other entities that could say, like for people that are Christian, they would say, I'm connecting with Jesus here. Or they might say, I'm connecting with an archangel, to get some higher wisdom, because I admit, like in the 12 steps, I can't control everything. Someone else is kind of helping me here, okay? And then they would also look at the animals that were present in their environment. And so in a lot of traditions, the animal of the East was the eagle, because it was a high flyer. And then they also looked at, well, what are the natural herbs that occur or that have a contribution to make? And in the Plains Indians, that herb was tobacco, because they believed that when they burned tobacco, it sent their messages on the smoke to Great Spirit. And then they also had another aspect. They were incorporating the different kingdoms, right? Okay. So then the minerals, and so they said that mica, jade, and calcite were stones that you could work with that had a certain message for you. But everything has symbology. Everything had a meaning. It wasn't just, oh, there's a stone. It was, this stone has some healing for me if I place it in my hand or put it near my body. And then when we go to the south, we're talking about high noon. We're talking about dawn in the east, high noon in the south. We're talking about summer, the heat. We're talking about growth, trust, and love as qualities. Sometimes the animal for the Plains Indians would be a coyote, because coyote was kind of like the dog chasing its tail. And it's where you either get a sense of humor or you lose it, because things are kind of catching up with you all the time. And, then they also ascribed, other qualities to it. But basically, those are some of the aspects of the South. And as Betsie mentioned, the South was an area of healing. Mm-hmm. And so then we moved to the next corridor, was the adolescence, which is west, and west is the illusion.
Go back.
Okay, so I was talking about the west and the medicine wheel, and the fact that it's the direction of illusion. It's also the direction of what we call completions. If east is beginnings and illumination, west is completions, and the illusion. And another aspect of the west is truth, that as we move through that corridor of adolescence and younger adulthood, we begin to learn a little bit more about life. We begin to embody who we're going to become, what our belief systems are, how much we're holding on to from parents, how much we're learning from our experiences. And so again, like the other directions, the West represents fall. It also has an animal associated with it in many cultures, which is bear. And the reason that association is the bear hibernates, goes within. And so in order to get at truth, in order to lift the veils of illusion, we go within and begin to discover our inner being. And, you know, some other things that are associated with the West are an herb, which is cedar. And we say that cedar, this is Plains Indians, they use the cedar for purification. So a lot of times when I did healing sessions with someone that had a lot of mental, physical, or emotional disease, I would smudge with cedar before and after so that I wasn't picking it up. And then the stones that are associated with the West are hematite, amber, and lapis. And again, that's the mineral kingdoms. We have the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom. But it's probably one of the directions that people remember the most because that's where so many of life lessons are. And then we move to the north, and we're moving into the probably the middle to the outer edges of our adulthood and into the elderhood passage. And there is where we get a lot of support because it's the direction of the ancestors and wisdom. And so in many of the ceremonies that people do to honor these directions in the north, they're calling on the spirit of their ancestors or a guide to help them get knowledge that they can use in their daily life. And cleansing, purification, and renewal are the aspects of the West. That's what we're looking for. And the stones there are sodalite, hematite, and peridot. And the animal of the West, it depends on which culture you're in. Many are the North, many of them look at buffalo because the buffalo carried a story of a time of peace. In fact, there's a great corollary to the time that we're in right now and the predictions of the Hopis and some of the other tribes, that we would move through this corridor we're in to this 100 years of peace or 1,000 years of peace. And that the white buffalo, when it occurred, would announce that time. And it's very interesting because a lot of the prophecies of the different tribes are being actualized in our lifetime so that we're seeing them. And so in the north, we use the herb sweetgrass, and that's to invite these good connections, these ancestors. It's a very, have you ever smelled sweetgrass burning?
Oh yeah.
Michael?
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. Even when my mother thought I was a nutcase following this path of the shaman, if I burned sweetgrass, she'd say, would you burn that good smelling stuff again? It's to invite that presence. And, you know, in the north, the native peoples look at the 7 generations that came behind them and the 7 generations that are come after them. And it's kind of like a relay race. We're preparing to hand off the baton to the generations that come after us. And so in the indigenous people belief system, we have to stand in integrity. Yeah. We have to recognize that our actions and the things we do hand off a better world. Okay, and then we return, you know, back to the east. So we've moved, and the north is midnight, as the south was high noon. The east is dawn, as the west was, I'm getting lost here, I'm sorry. It's okay. The west is twilight, yeah. So there, what I'm trying to explain is that in this greater cosmology called the medicine world, there were a lot of meanings and symbologies that help people live by. And different tribes might ascribe different animals or different herbs to it or different elements to it. But they all believed that there was a cycle of life from beginning to completion, and that they had certain lessons to learn in that journey. And then I mentioned earlier that we also have an inner set of medicine wheels. And in that we have 4 personas. We have the adult of our present being. We have the inner child of our present being. We call that the north shield, the adult. the south shield, the child, the inner child. We have the opposite gender adult, which is what's called the west shield. And we have the opposite gender child, which is called the east shield. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that many people came through a lot of trauma in their childhood. Betsie mentioned that before. In shamanism, we use something called soul retrieval to help bring people back to healing with that. But this inner shield of the adult and the two adults and the two children is also a big piece of healing a lot of that trauma. Because what happens for most people is they live their life through the north and the south shield. And we call that, when they're unhealed, we call that the judge and the victim. And you see that a lot with people. People that have been victimized tend to victimize because their judge, their inner judge is constantly giving them negative feedback. So the benefit of bringing in the cross shields, the adult of the opposite gender, and the little child is to begin to balance that out. So we say that if the north is the judge and the child is the victim, then we bring in the west, the inner knowing, the intuition, and in the east, we bring back the playful child, the child that believes in wonder and magic. And when we work with those and begin to flesh out those opposite gender ones, we create a situation in which there's a lot of balance. And I think that immeasurably helps people. I've worked with a lot of people on healing that inner south shield, because when it's healed, then instead of the north being the judge, we call the north a benevolent parent. And the south is the person that's able to express emotions in a good way. Mm-hmm. So we could say, I'll give you an example. Let's say that the child does something really untoward, okay? And if we're playing judge and victim, the north shield, the parent, is going to come down on them. They're going to call them names, everything. But if they become the benevolent parent, then they discover what the kid did that was wrong, and they sit down with the child and they say, okay, well, tell me what happened. And the child tells a story. And then when they're done with the story, instead of ranting and raving, the benevolent parent says, and what did you learn? And it gets the child thinking about, oh, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to ever do that again. And so they kind of self-monitor themselves. So this is the inner wheel. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the most significant things in shamanism is the outer wheel and how you're functioning with the four kingdoms, animal, plant, mineral, and human. And the inner wheel, medicine wheel, of how you're able to become a whole person. And I see that played out a lot because, like Betsie, I do weddings. And if people are looking for their other half, 99.9% of the time, they're not going to find it because they're not whole to begin with. And what I talk with people about is that when you come into a marriage or a partnership, you need to be whole. And then you take a small piece of that wholeness and contribute to building this new circle in the middle. But you maintain 7/8 of your wholeness to contribute to that. So I think there's a lot of ways shamanism can help. The concept of the circle is so important because I think I said this when we were talking earlier. One of the reasons I feel there's an increase in violence with our social distancing, people are stuck in these squares and these rectangles that have harsh corners. There's no place for the energy to flow. There's no cycles of beginning and ending. Like we have sun cycles, we have moon cycles, and it begins to build up a lot of anxiety. And I think if you already have lived through abuse as a child and you've not been able to heal that yet, and you get into a relationship and it begins to mimic the things that you saw, that closure of energy, that being boxed in, can drive a person to violence. And so the thing that I feel is important is to get tools like soul retrieval, like hypnosis, to begin to go into that wound and heal it so that we're not feeling that. And then to get outside. I think that being in nature was the way people lived, and we've boxed ourselves in literally, and that has not been productive at all for society. And that's part of the disconnection, like I said before, the severing of the tribal tether. So
and that's interesting. That's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, that's needed for right now, because with everybody being inside, the family violence, it's said, has went up. I mean, I've seen all types of abuse that people have posted online, and it's just what could people do right now where they're at, you know, to kind of, I mean, of course, if there's anybody that's in that situation, reach out. I know that I'm available if you want to talk to me or anybody else. But what can they do? What advice could we give them, or could you guys give them to, I don't know, just give them strength to stand up and get out of a situation like that if they're in a situation like that at the moment?
I think part of it is recognizing that they're in it, you know, and frequently people that are very violent forget about it afterwards, like kind of like they space out or blank out. Mm-hmm. I feel that getting in touch with the inner medicine shield and recognizing that there are these cycles of animation and entropy, and maybe beginning to learn some ceremony. Most cultures had a greeting in the morning. They would go out and greet the sun, you know. They would close their day with some gratitude. I think teaching people about the medicine wheel and how it affects them, and figuring out how to create some structures within and without, like sacred places inside, altars outside, labyrinths outside, places where you're in a circle, which is an unending kind of energy, and understanding that if we as humans were better at aligning with the natural rhythms, we would not feel so cloistered and we would feel more open. So I think encourage people to get outside when they can,
nature,
to seek help, to have hypnosis or have some other method of healing presented to them, and to figure out that this isn't all about them. Okay, that they're not inherently bad, that they have come to that place because of the pressures of the way that we live, the things that came out of their childhood, and the unrealistic expectation that 2 or more people can live in a box and be comfortable. So, I'm against boxes. I mean, it's why I move all the time, Betsy. You know that. I'll be laying on the couch.
Now I know.
I'll be laying on the couch. It's beautiful, and then I'll go, oh no, the walls are closing in. I have to get out.
Well, what you were saying about walls in general, the boxes, the 90-degree angles that we have in our home, that's interesting as well, because I believe it's the Temple of Set or Seti, maybe in Egypt. Their temple was built, and the corners, they don't have 90-degree angles. They have angles that kind of curve and then make their way around. And what they found out with testing is that is for the natural flow of energy that flows from the stones to continue, because at 90-degree angles it kills frequencies. So
absolutely, yes.
Well, I'm sorry, I was just going to. Amari had talked at the very beginning about how we've lost the tribal connection, you know, and I think that's another reason for abuse. People feel like that they're all alone, and that's that wounded child again. Mm-hmm. And you know, with hypnotherapy, I keep harping on 21 days. Mm-hmm. But when somebody abuses someone else, usually it's the pattern from their childhood, and that's what they knew. And so they replicate that, and it takes 21 times, 21 days to change it, you know, to really bring in something like this beautiful shield where you can over and over integrate the new pattern into your life. But you know, it really takes quite an effort to do that. It's not something that's easy to do, and you want to. It's like somebody who's in AA and they want to drink. You know, they slip back and they don't know why. It's like the person who's abusing slips back too, because something triggers that anger. You know, instead of stepping back and going, "Whoa, wait a minute, time out." You know,
it's a pattern, and it's like in my life. I would enter bad relationships. Mm-hmm. I would be going along and I'd be kind of, things are flowing, I'm doing okay, and then something would come up and I'd go into damaged inner child. Yeah. And every time I'd find some relationship that didn't work.
Right.
And it was like, until I finally began to talk to her.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember this, Betsie, but we had people make dolls for their inner child.
Oh, yeah.
So when you had that stuff come up, you get the doll and you talk to her. Well, what's going on? Why are you repeating this pattern?
Yes.
And another thing I wanted to say, I just saw a thing in a prison where they were doing a big circle working with a woman that was doing some helping people get their stories out. And began to accept that, that some of it was not their responsibility. I mean, what they did, but where it came from. And so we're beginning to see that glimpses of different healing methods are bubbling up from the surface.
Yes.
And helping people. But it's very hard to overcome that child unless you get some technique to work with.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize that a lot of things that happen in our youth will affect you forever. Like,
right.
And a lot of times people will say that they've forgiven somebody for this, or they've let this or that go. And they believe that for many, many years. I was one of those people that believed that I had overcome this thing. All right. So when I was young, I was into drugs and alcohol and like on an abusive level. I would abuse anything that I could get my hands on. Everything was extreme. I never got into never mind. I got into everything I could, I guess, but I never ran drugs in my arms. I never did shoot up or anything like that, but I did do a lot of different chemicals throughout my life as a kid. And it came to the point to where I just felt like it was just nothing, my life. It was like I just did drugs to the end, and it was because of certain situations. Well, I ended up started going to church and this and that, and changed my life. And they teach in church about forgiveness and forgiving yourself and forgiving others and blah 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 blah. And I really went through the methods that they had taught and felt like I had overcome these issues in my youth that had caused me to come to a place of such destructiveness in my own life. And in a way I did, but some of the things I let go of, some of the things I tucked down deep, and those things are the things that are dangerous because they're silent, they're subtle. And those things are the things that it's okay. Yeah. I forgive my father for not being there, but do you forgive your father for the pain that you feel from that not being there? You see what I'm saying? So I forgive the one, but I didn't get rid of the pain that was there, I guess. So, and I was just using a father figure as an example. So years down the road, trauma happens in my life, right? Things happen, and a lot of it can even be your own doing, your own undoing. And at the end of it, you step back. And because all of this stress and all of this pain has just now enveloped you, again, even if it's of your own accord, all of a sudden you're in a place, you're in a place of going, oh shit, all of this pain, all of this hate, all of this anger that you thought was gone, now just comes rushing up. And I became the biggest asshole you've ever met in your life. And I'm not an asshole. I'm pretty much, I try to be a nice guy, but it had gotten to the point to where it was just bubbling up so much in me. I was manic. I was cussing people out of the damn drive-through if they didn't give me the food that I wanted to exact. You know what I mean? Stuff that's so out of character, but it was bubbling up out of so much pain, hurt, and past stuff that I'd never dealt with. And
well, it was coming up to be healed.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. Yeah.
And that's the great thing, because once it did come up and I did get to see it, and I did get to say, okay, this is really still here, and got past my ego that said, oh, because I forgave somebody, it's gone. And I started realizing that I had to introspect and say, okay, no, there's something wrong with me inside. I need to fix something deep. Stop worrying about everybody else. Stop worrying about, because that was another thing in Christianity. They teach you to go out and win the lost. Go out, and it's all about an outward communication kind of way of serving God, I guess you'd say, instead of it being it's really about you, just you.
Well,
and when you are healed, whole, and
that introspection.
Yeah, exactly. And when you are complete, then guess what? I mean, it's your relationship You know, it's your relationship, it's your building, it's your growth. It's not about trying to go out in the moment that you're in, because even though I read my Bible all the time, I did all the things that, you know, you were supposed to do as a good little Christian, and I knew all the stuff, and I was able to teach the stuff. You're teaching other people at a state that you're at, even with your shortcomings that you don't even know are shortcomings.
Sure.
Until later on. You see what I'm saying? And a lot of people are doing that throughout. We're teaching at a level of half truth that we have in ourselves, of going, okay, well, we got to forgive people, but we don't really understand what that means to forgive people. You know, we got to forgive them, yes, but we also got to heal inside of ourselves that wound that they cause, or, you know, we say they cause. I really believe that everything happens as a direct result of our own actions in some way, shape, or form, through karma. You know, so
we have to come to self-love before we, and self-forgiveness before we can heal, and we can't give to others what we don't have, you know. And I think it's, I went through rage therapy before I moved to New Mexico. I had stuffed all of it, and then I worked with someone that said I had to get the rage out. And so for 3 days, I sent my son to his father's. I raged. I wrote 40 handwritten pages of how much I hated my childhood. And then some of it was how much I hated myself. And that was revealing it. And it was like crying and raging and punching and hitting and just incredible, screaming. You know, no one was around. Everything was disconnected. And I think that it just had to, it's like a vomitus. It has to get out. Yeah. You know, and then I was introduced to the shamanic work and began to work in those cycles. And I think that's so important, because we live against it. We live on watches. You know, like one of the gifts of COVID-19 is staying home, as people begin to disassociate with, I don't have to be at work at 7 or 8 or 9. I can get up when I feel like it, and that's healthy.
Oh, man, let me tell you.
I told people it's very liberating. It's very liberating to have gotten out of our old routine.
For sure.
Wonderful.
All right. So, yeah, about 6-8 months ago now, I was working nonstop. I mean, I've always been that guy, you know, get up and go, just run all day long. And a few months back, I started having some heart issues, which put me in, it was a AFib is what it ended up being. And long story short, ended up having an ablation. They wanted to give me more ablations, and kept going with that for months. This was going on, you know. And so I actually started looking for alternate ways of healing, because the way that they were doing was just, I would just want to go back inside of you and you burn your heart up again, you know. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. So that's actually how I ended up finding Betsie, is because I went to a acupuncturist in Gainesville, because I'd read that acupuncture may help some people. And it did help for about a week, but I guess, I don't know how acupuncture works. Maybe it just severs nerves, but I guess when that nerve maybe grew back or something, it started again. I don't know. But went from that, ended up meeting Betsie, had some sessions with her. And then I ended up finding this through just inward prayer and reflection, a thing called L-carnitine, which is just an amino acid. The moment I started taking that, my heart stopped going into AFib.
I wanted to write that down, because I thought that L-carnitine.
Yeah, L-carnitine. And but in that moment, in that time, I was laying around for months, not doing anything. And at first, you know, you feel so out of your element, like you feel like you're skipping school. Or you're hiding out from something that you're supposed to be doing, you know. And then
I should be doing something else.
Yeah, exactly. I can't calm down. I can't stop. I can't, you know, you just feel like you got to be moving all the time. But once that subsided and the peace of stillness of not doing came into effect, it was like, there is a great doing for yourself in not doing, man. And it's beautiful. Yeah. So it's definitely been a great ride for me.
Well, it kind of brings up meditation too, and not everybody can do meditation in a traditional way. One of my books is about 5-minute meditations and 5-minute breathing, and it's designed to help people that can't sit still, or they have to be walking or doing something. But just that, even just deep breathing when you're really stressed. I mean, if we could work with an abuser and get them to recognize moments before they're going to hit.
Yeah.
Just get them to step aside, put their hands on their solar plexus.
Mm-hmm.
Just start doing some really long, slow breathing for about 5 minutes. You know, they're teaching meditation for children instead of punishment in schools.
That's beautiful.
In the meditation,
thank goodness.
We have a plethora of wonderful tools available to us. Didn't exist, or at least weren't prevalent when we were coming up. You know, Betsie and I, but you know, they're now available. And I think just to be able to go into a home and see the people as humans. That's what the shaman used to do. You didn't have someone come to you. If they had a problem, you went to their home. You actually lived with them. You needed to know what was going on energetically, socially, you know, the dynamics of the relationship, and then you could help them. You could see what was going on, and you could say, okay, let's begin here. Let's shift this. Let's work on this. But that, you know, the way that you were feeling with your father, all that stuff that we bring out of our childhood, until we can heal it and begin to love ourselves. And, you know, what I was struck with is that I've done a lot of accounting, Michael, in my life. It kind of sustained me. But in accounting, we have what's called a T account. And so you make a big T, and on the left are all the assets, okay, all the good stuff. And on the right are the liabilities, the not so good stuff, and it's balanced by your equity. So, you know, we tend to, if someone says, what are your good qualities? You know, after we've done some healing, we can list those. But then on the other side, we're ashamed of those. And so part of self-healing and all of this work on the inner child is to come and say, okay, sometimes I throw things across the room. As long as I don't hit anybody, I'm probably okay. And it's loving both sides of that, which brings it into balance. You know, so you're not just prioritizing your wonderful qualities, you know, but you're saying, I am a human being. I'm having a human experience, and I'm okay. As long as I'm not hurting other people, I'm okay. You know, and you begin that self-forgiveness. I think after we forgive those other people, we have to come to, you know, our self-forgiveness. And that was what was so healing for me in that whole rage weekend, was recognizing that I hated myself. And it's because you came up with all these things that were negative, and then you start replicating them, like you were talking, Michael. And then the self-hate comes in, and then you're in this cycle. So
that's right, man. And cycles are a big thing. Something that I'd like to get into with you guys one day. We're running out of time, though. We're about 5 minutes down. So if anybody would like to have any final thoughts real quick.
Well, I think that, you know, I came to shamanism through trauma. Okay. And then Betsie ended up coming to me because she needed more information. There's a whole cycle of how people come into this to this work. And
it added a richness to our lives, where I'd always felt alone and really kind of isolated, even though I was married, you know. And then when I brought in the directions, and I work a lot with angels. I work a lot. It was like I had a whole tribe. And I did, and I have used them ever since. And every day, the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning, I put my feet on the floor and I go, "Oh, thank you, you know, angels, guides, ascended masters. You know, what are we going to do today?"
Absolutely.
And it's thank you.
And a lot of people don't know that we do have a host of entities, or whatever you want to call it, energies that are there waiting to assist you if you
have
to ask.
You interact.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think also adding sacred space. I think we could talk about that, how to create some sacred space in your home so you feel that connection.
Yes. And that goes to when I help people with teach them meditation or hypnosis, I say create a sacred space in your home where you can go, and that says to your subconscious mind, "Oh, time to look at that right now," and it's really beautiful.
Well, awesome, man. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you guys coming out and talking with me, and